Good morning, Bitcoiners. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing great. Let me see what's up here in the comments. Good morning, Bitcoiners. Boo Boo Bodacious. Good morning to you. Time to water the garden. Well, I hope that goes well. I think it's a beautiful morning wherever you are. Louis says, good morning to all those doing Bitcoin. We are indeed doing Bitcoin all the time now. B for Victory says, good morning, Bitcoiners. We see a coffee. We see a sun. Let me give you all a bit of a confirmation here. We had an excellent sunrise this morning. It was perfect. Bitcoin running as perfectly as ever. So all that's left for us to do is have a coffee and talk about what's new. Good morning, Hassan. Hope you're doing well. Looks like you got some squats, deadlifts going in there. Like to see that. Good morning, Dex. Hope you're doing well. Centillionaire, good morning. Good morning. Bitcoin Graffiti with the coffee. As you know, every morning we like to get started with the absolute fakest news we can find. It's Moscow time, Moscow time, Moscow time. I got some good ones. So one movie I probably won't be going to with my children is the new Little Mermaid live action remake. Now, I got nothing against live action remakes, and most of the Disney stuff doesn't really do it for me. I wasn't a big fan of a lot of these cartoons when they came out in the first place. But the length of this one, the Little Mermaid, I think it went from the cartoon being 80 something minutes, which my kids like. They've watched it. They love mermaids. You'd think with the amount of love they have for mermaids, they would watch The Little Mermaid more often. So they don't really, not a huge fan. So I can't imagine them sitting through this movie, which is, I think, 2 hours and a bit now. But it looks like something else is missing, according to the New York Times. So the New York Times says Disney's live-action remake of The Little Mermaid with Halle Bailey starring as Ariel and a diverse cast reeks of obligation and noble intentions, Wesley Morris writes. But here's what they say is missing: joy, fun, mystery, risk, flavor, and kink. They're missing. So there's no kink in this Little Mermaid. So I guess there's no way I can go see it with my little children now that there's no kink in it, right? Where was the kink? How about this? This is a new trend, apparently, why bed rotting is the newest hot self-care trend for lazy Gen Zers. So what is bed rotting? Well, you can guess it. It's spending all your time in bed, right? So just sitting around in bed apparently is now self-care. I will give you all a bit of advice. I was talking with someone at Bitcoin 2023 last week, and we were talking about sleep and sleep habits. Someone was just asking me, a fan of the show was asking me about systems and how I go about, getting up every day at 8 for the show. I mean, I obviously get up earlier than 8. We've talked a lot about bedtimes and stuff like that. Not a great sleeper he is, and was asking me just some tips and advice on sleep. One thing I will give you as advice is never do anything other than the 2 things you should be doing in bed, or you can do in bed. Don't do anything besides those 2 things. The 2 things being, of course, sleep and, enjoying bed with your partner, right? That's it. There's nothing else. Don't read books in bed. Very bad. Don't ever watch television in bed, right? Awful. Basically, my system for having great sleep every night is to only do those things that I just mentioned when I go to bed. So when I know it's time to go to bed and I actually physically move to the bed, everything starts flowing and it's just my body knows what to do. I'll fall asleep, right? So remember that. That's a really good rule for sleep. Don't do anything in your bed. Do not bed rot. Bed rotting is the worst thing you could possibly do for sleep. All right. So that's just my advice. So there you go. I'm not done with Moscow time. No, I've got more. Here's MSNBC saying there's no hypocrisy in treating Dianne Feinstein and John Fetterman differently. So here's what they say. So I don't know if you knew this, but it's not just Biden who has some low brain activity. It's also the Senator Dianne Feinstein, whose brain is just not operating anymore. She's too old and it's not happening. And Fetterman, who had the stroke, and now his brain is broken in a different way, right? So what they're saying here is that you can't, it's unfair to compare how their brains are broken, right? They're not the same, guys. Come on. Here's what they say. Fetterman has effectively used technology to process speech, but there's no fixing Feinstein's increasingly worrisome memory lapse. Well, that's good news for us. We can still support our candidate for 2024, John Fetterman, because technology has been used to process his speech. So that's good news, right? He's still in the game. Here's one of the quotes from the article, in case you're wondering. Conservatives, stupid conservatives, are making dishonest comparisons between Feinstein and Senator John Fetterman, who had a stroke during his 2020 campaign for the position. Jeez, the conservatives again doing it. What are they doing, right? I just wanted to read what Bitcoin Graffiti said here in the comments, which I think is great. Original Little Mermaid was pretty good in my opinion. Yeah, I liked it. I mean, I'm not against it. I let my children watch it, if that means anything. I'm pretty strict about the bad stuff not being allowed in front of their eyes. For example, they have no clue about the new Star Wars show, and they never will. They will only have access to the first 6 Star Wars movies. Although I don't mind The Force Awakens, the rest of them, they will never have access to them. I mean, it's not just that. I police absolutely what it is they watch. And, you know, one thing I don't mind that they watch, on YouTube, they have these, you know, kids doing, making toys, playing with toys. I love watching, and their number one thing is to just watch people make their own stories with toys. And they love that. They could watch that stuff all day long, right? Bitcoin Graffiti mentions he wrote an article about The Little Mermaid, and some of the Jungian stuff. I will definitely check that out, because again, you know, that era, I don't know if you guys know this, that era of Disney stories, I think starting with The Little Mermaid, including Lion King, Aladdin, that era was heavily influenced by the Joseph Campbell monomyth formula. So one of the reasons I was excited when Disney took over Star Wars was because they had practiced formulaically creating stories using the Joseph Campbell monomyth formula. So I thought it would be a perfect match. I thought, and if you guys didn't know, Joseph Campbell's teachings on mythology are the source and inspiration and formula that was used by George Lucas to create Star Wars, very explicitly used in The Matrix. The Matrix also almost a shot-for-shot recreation of the formula Joseph Campbell created or discovered, let's say, right? It wasn't an invention. Joseph Campbell, if you don't know about Joseph Campbell, was probably the world's foremost authority or most knowledgeable person. I don't think there's an authority question involved. The most knowledgeable person in his time regarding mythologies around the world. And basically at his fingertips, had access to every story of every people of all time, all their origin stories. He spent years in Kyoto studying Japanese mythology. He spent years with Native Americans learning all of their tales. And like I said, at his fingertips was like encyclopedically aware and knowledgeable about all kinds of mythology. And through that was able to distill a formula that he noticed penetrate through the stories that lasted. So the stories that lasted, the stories that maintained, that weren't fairy tales. He had a lot of ways of distinguishing what a fairy tale was versus a myth. And he was a professor, very successful one. People loved his course. People were addicted to his way of teaching. The books are a little hard to read. The Hero with 1,000 Faces being his most famous. He even allowed Luke Skywalker to be on the cover of that book for a whole print, or a few prints, especially in the 80s and 90s. The print that I have, and a lot of people have, is actually, one of those composite, a bunch of pictures that fill in and create a portrait of a person. In the case of the book that I have, I believe it's Apollo created by images of Jesus, all patched together. I'm not sure if that's exactly it, but it's one of these, statues, faces created by other composite images of other faces. So the hero with 1,000 faces being his most famous. And there you go. Joseph Campbell was the world's most foremost authority on tomato soup. I did not know that. It's basic biology. I was unaware. There you go. The 12-stage hero cycle. Exactly. That's what we're talking about here. Try telling, notice it's face-to-face. Nice change from reading together, which is side by side. Try telling your children stories. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Yeah, I do try to tell my kids stories fairly often. They're always asking about stories about when I was a kid. So there you go. So that's what's going on in the news. That's fake. Now, what's going on in the news that's real? Well, a few things. The first thing I want to mention, let me just see if I got these in the right order. Yeah, okay, I did. So the first thing I wanted to mention here was the BRICS. Should I do that first? No, I'm going to do the Wall Street Journal's story first. So this is a Wall Street Journal story. Now, what I wanted to mention about this is it sets up what we're going to talk about for the rest of this morning, which is really just an appetite that's out there for changing institutions, for remaking the world, really. And that's something that Bitcoiners are obviously 100% in on, right? Bitcoiners are doing Bitcoin not because Visa credit cards didn't transact fast enough, or we need a new system for capital formation, or we need a new system to raise money to invest in ideas. All of these are subcategories and interesting enough, but they're not the reason why most Bitcoiners are here. Most Bitcoiners are here because they want a top-down, bottom-up reversal of how we organize things internationally, how we organize countries, people, our relationship with nations and individuals, our relationships between nations. Here's one of the easiest ways to even understand the old debates, right? So the old debates with Marxism and Leninism, right? Marxism was that it was all about class differences, right? Rich and poor, and there were rich people because there were poor people, and it was a zero-sum game. And then Lenin came along and said, okay, it's about people as well, but also about countries. Really what we're dealing with here is the conflict between countries. So we need to have a new way to organize that. We should all be communist, and then it won't be that way. So Leninism really about countries, Marxism about classes, and that was the whole frame for the last era of debates around reorganizing how humans interact, reorganizing nation states, reorganizing the systems that we use to run the world. Everything was redrawn, reconstituted, rebuilt after World War II. And we're dealing with the ramifications of all of that. So America set up a ton of institutions at that time, right? The UN, what is the UN but a way of America hiding its imperialistic tendencies through this organization and allowing folks to have what looks like a debate, right? The International Criminal Court, very similar. All of it in the end, though, supported by the US ability to sanction people internationally using the dollar system and the US banking hegemony around the world. So although all of these institutions were created over time, really they are all based on the US capacity to extend its reach through money, right? So it's a follow the money analysis. And that's what brings most Bitcoiners to the table. Not all, right? There's all kinds of reasons why people do Bitcoin. There's all kinds of reasons why people are interested. But the majority, I would say, come from the cypherpunk vision of reconstituting society by having a better money. And if money can be made in this different way, then the logic around some of the institutions that we have would go away, and the way they operate would go away, and all of those things. So America set up all these institutions and has been the main steward of these institutions for a long time. But one of the interesting things, and this comes from a Wall Street Journal article from just the other day, from just Friday. So, what this article suggests here is the Russia collusion Trump case and all of that stuff. Now, go back in time to remember what Russia collusion was about, right? Remember how I always mention very hard to keep Russia collusion in your brain because a lot of it is boring. A lot of time passes and the world moves on. But what exactly was it always? Remember, it was the P tape, right? We've talked about the P tape many times. But the logic behind what Russia was doing, remember that. The logic that the newspaper said was at play, that experts said was at play, was that Russia was trying to weaken American institutions, right? By getting people to argue, by getting people to not have faith in the election system, because, oh, Russia has influenced America's elections, right, through this blackmail system that they have on President Trump and all of this kind of stuff. So this went on for a long time, right? The reaction for many people was, oh, Russia made you think that, right? You're doing Putin's bidding if you support Trump. Remember, that was like a major part of the logic. Now, people who were following the Russia collusion story at the time are like, I don't think that's really what I see. And then finally, when the Mueller report came out, there was nothing in it. There's never really been a reckoning for the people that lied. So the Wall Street Journal starts to talk about this reckoning in this article. Here's what they say. Finally, we can ask who really colluded with Russia. But here's the important thing in the byline, right? This is written by Holman Jenkins Jr. He says, if the crime is promoting distrust in institutions, the evidence is strongest against the FBI and the media. Because remember, that was the whole point about the Russia collusion story, that Russia was undermining trust and promoting distrust in American institutions. That was the whole argument from the beginning. That's why you couldn't listen to it. That's why it was so dangerous. We don't want to set a precedent. This is going to be the worst, et cetera, right? So the article says, millions of Americans despise Donald Trump and probably think it was justified or at least good, clean fun when the Hillary campaign manufactured fake evidence of collusion with Russia, and the FBI and other branches of government used this information to trammel his presidency. At least this view, whatever it's false, isn't stupid. But stop the presses. Now we have a real case of collusion. Since the Ukraine war, Russia's PR operation has published lists of individuals under meaningless Kremlin sanctions. These lists are scanned by pundits, wonks, and politicians to see if they can brag about being unpopular with Vladimir Putin. We saw that with Lindsey Graham, right? There was a call to arrest Lindsey Graham this week, right, for saying that it was money well spent, all the money we've given to Ukraine because it kills Russians, right? That was this actual quote, right? Money well spent. So this is along those lines, right? So people scan these things. It's the same the other way around. America will put Chinese people and Russian people on a list, and then they can't travel and all of these things, right? We're going to get to the travel thing in a minute. Because, by the way, there was some changes to the BRICS rules in South Africa, and we're going to talk about what that means for Putin to travel to the BRICS meeting this summer, because that was just done. So here's more of the article. Last week, Russia came out with 500 more names, including some criticized by Donald Trump, like Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who certified his 2020 defeat in the state, and the Capitol policeman who shot Ashley Babbitt during the January 6th riot. Press commentary universally portrayed this as a Kremlin attempt to help Mr. Trump. But how does it help Mr. Trump, and how could Russia fail to know exactly how its action would be played in the US press? How is the press, therefore, not playing along with Russia, right? So here's the logic. If Russia understands what's going on, why would they make it look like they help Trump? Because the media is just going to say, oh, this is more of an example of Trump-Russia collusion. Look at what's going on here, right? But here's what the author says. The word we've needed all along for the press and its fellow collusion hoax promoters is disingenuous. Which really means not candid or sincere, right? Particularly by pretending that one knows less about something than one really does. Disingenuousness was the press's handling of a collusion story that it always knew was partisan, implausible, and unsupported. Disingenuous was the New York Times, harumphing last week that the latest John Durham report fails to live up to years of political hype. Of course, it shouldn't have. Hype is the sort of hyperbole or exaggeration, right? Do we want prosecutors to cleave to hype or to facts. Read on, and the hype Mr. Germ failed to live up on to was Mr. Trump's. The paper relies on Mr. Trump to tell it how to frame the news, right? So they're talking about all the different disingenuous writers and their way of promoting this story over time, right? And what he's saying here is that we've come to a point now where we know that Trump never colluded with Russia. And yet these names that Russia puts on the list would suggest that the story has never changed, but it's more just forcing the American media to admit that it won't admit, right? To admit that it won't admit what it's learned about Trump Russia over the last 5 years. And so he goes on, right? To convince itself the FBI was on the up and up, the press continues to place impossible weight on the fact that in officially opening a Trump investigation, the agency made a point of citing the one piece of evidence that didn't originate with the Clinton campaign. The press continues to distort the plain words of the Justice Department Inspector General, who explained at length why he is prohibited from inferring improper motives from improper acts by the FBI officials. And when all else fails, they rely on insinuation and the unprovability of a negative. But politicized and partisan aren't the same thing. In my reading of events, the FBI's leadership, while suffused with contempt for Mr. Trump, mainly assumed Mrs. Clinton would win. Then Mr. Trump won, and a desperate cover-up was born. Just put into words what happened. In response to fake and possibly planted Russian intelligence, the FBI improperly and insubordinately meddled in the Clinton email case in a way that accidentally helped elect Mr. Trump, right? So the story, still hidden in a classified appendix of the Inspector General's report, is an agreed blind spot by Mr. Trump and the FBI. Neither is keen to emphasize the agency's contribution to his 2016 victory. The one stone left unturned by Mr. Durham, except in a single footnote, is the spate of illegal leaks, a potential avenue for imposing criminal liability on FBI leadership for the cavalcade of misadventure it inflicted on this country. For whether you despise Mr. Trump and wish he were never elected or believe he should have been given a chance, both sides can blame James Comey. Hard to exaggerate is how much damage this one man did to our country in 2016 and 2017. You think Mr. Comey and his intelligence confreres were protecting the country from Mr. Trump? They couldn't care less. They were trying to protect themselves from blowback for their own actions, right? And so go around in the circles, right? All along, the press has been shockingly incompetent and dishonest. I'm not given to categorical predictions, but here's one. If the New York Times, Washington Post, and other top-tier news outlets treated any one of the following stories the way they would have if Mr. Trump didn't exist: the collusion hoax, the Hunter Biden laptop evasion, the Biden clan's influence peddling, Mr. Trump would be a fading force in U.S. politics by now. The thing that primarily keeps him afloat is the contemptible behavior of his enemies, including a press that insists on positioning itself as the enemy, whatever damage, as his enemy, whatever the damage to its own standards of factual and intellectual honesty. Which brings us to where we started. The right way to report the new Russian sanctions list would have been to be upfront with readers and viewers about the Kremlin's desire to inflame again the collusion controversy, to keep Americans divided and distrustful of each other and their institutions. But of course, this might have opened up the question of the press's collusion with Russia and whipping up the collusion hoax in the first place. So indeed, what the article is suggesting here is that the media anyway, will do anything it can to avoid the truth, right? Which is that Hillary Clinton was the only person who colluded with Russia in the entire case. And that part was completely ignored. And the work of all of these people over time needed some way to make it make sense. So it's just lie upon lie upon lie. So when the Russians create this list, when they create a new sanctions list, they're forcing the media and the FBI to double down on the lie they've already told from 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. And if there's any worry, the original worry, of course, was that American institutions were going to be threatened by Russian disinformation. Well, it's what's happening now, right? It is still happening to this day. And the appetite we have now for a change in these institutions has never been greater. Just look at what's going on and look at how powerless they are, right? Just look at how powerless they are for a second. Look at how different the world seems from 2016 till now. Before 2016, you wouldn't imagine that the reserve currencies of a country, right? So that the Russians holding so much US dollar could ever be taken away by the international banking system. Well, it's gone, right? So right away, America's capacity to enforce sanctions and provably hurt a country is now totally off the table, right? So they took the Russian US dollar, showed that having these reserve currencies for a sovereign nation wasn't really the deal that they all thought. That ended up having an effect on looking into Russia's own economy and whether or not it would grow or shrink or what would happen based on US sanctions. Well, it turns out Russia did not experience a fatal blow. Now, there's definitely things they have to go without. Who knows how much longer the Russian economy can stay strong based on its troubles with the United States and its economic warfare going on with the United States. But it looks like China has been able to support Russia's economic expansion, economic growth. It looks like the ruble is quite stabilized after a year, gone up even relative to other currencies. So the sanctions and the US toolkit, the tool in their box for these economic sanctions, no longer nearly what it was. Now, the International Criminal Court as well would be another one of these international institutions, right? They've put an arrest warrant on Putin. Well, in South Africa today, or yesterday, I should say, in South Africa, they created a workaround for this. So South Africa creates immunity for the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, to attend a BRICS summit in August. So next week, all of the foreign ministers of these countries are going to get together to talk BRICS 2. And that'll set up the meeting later in August where Putin's going to come. So here's what S.L. Kanthan says, right? It's a slap in the face for the International Criminal Court, which has become a corrupt political tool. This BRICS meeting will herald de-dollarization and the rise of the global South. So you get the Minister of South Africa, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, as well as the President of South Africa are the folks who made this happen, right? So what S.L. Kanthan says, it will be a watershed moment in geopolitics for two reasons. Multipolar world, so there should be 20 plus new countries joining BRICS at this August meeting in South Africa. De-dollarization is the number one subject on the agenda, and it sounds like the BRICS shitcoin is going to be announced in August at this show, right, at this conference. And S.L. Kanthan's subheadline here is "The World Rejects American Hegemony and Endless Lies." What have we been calling the all lies, right? The allies in World War II have become the all lies in World War III. Well, now you get the global South saying it straight up, right? Rejecting American hegemony and the all lies. As for the ICCC, it dropped its investigation of American crimes in Afghanistan, fired its own chief, and brought in a new puppet. So America, obviously, not in the crosshairs of this, right? Here's other people talking about what's going on. Some people being fed up with the hypocrisy of the ICC, of the International Criminal Court. And here's Rick Way 123 saying South Africa has created a workaround for inviting President Putin to the BRICS summit. All participating heads of state will be given diplomatic immunity for the duration of the summit, so Putin can attend in person, right? So again, remember the whole Russia collusion case in the first place, right? It was to avoid Russia demeaning and diminishing US institutions, right? Well, what has happened? Well, all of that has happened, right? US institutions severely demeaned. And it wasn't because of anything Russia in particular did. It was because of the US reaction and the way the reaction was managed, the way the media was turned into a partisan apparatus, the way in which sanctions and the flow of money look suspiciously like well, we don't want to say exactly what it looks like because we don't know, but it looks a lot like a money laundering operation, right? In Ukraine and Russia. Now we have no proof at all, right? This is what Glenn Greenwald and others say, but we're not on the ground. We don't know how the money laundering works. We're not friends with SBF and any of these guys, right? Who maybe did a lot of this stuff. We don't know. We're still going to be paying attention to it and still think it sort of fits the storyline here, but who knows, right? Now, even when you consider American institutions like the UN or the International Criminal Court or American media, all of these things having so much trouble, having such a loss of credibility. Well, the Federal Reserve and the U.S. economy really, truthfully, right, the main instrument in which America gets alignment around the world, right? Everyone using the dollar, everyone following behind the U.S. equities market, the U.S. bond market, right? These are the things that have really been the engine behind how international order becomes orchestrated and coordinated. Now, one of the things that we're seeing is the U.S. media on this file being completely incapable of following the money and predicting where economic trouble is coming. Remember, what was said by the Federal Reserve and everyone back in the autumn was soft landing. Remember, before it was transient, it was just temporary inflation, then it was soft landing, and then America gets a whiplash of inflation or interest rate risk, interest rates being raised faster and higher than in all American history, 500 basis point increase. So 5 total percent increase in just a few months. If you remember what broke the Bank of England, it was 500 basis points in a day when the George Soros attack was launched. So one day was enough to break the Bank of England, right? So that's whiplash of all time. But America did the same thing in just about 6 months, right? So also extreme. 6 months, not one day, but nevertheless, it was the most extreme increase in U.S. interest rates in the history of the Federal Reserve. And it's created all kinds of knockdown effects, especially when you consider it as being in the context of COVID and what that's done to real estate. So this morning, lots of people talking about what's going on in real estate. We had David Sachs bringing up this point. He's got a thread he's been keeping on for about a month now, adding to it about the U.S. economy every single time there's a thing that looks large and terrible and in line with the Silicon Valley Bank story, which he covered very closely in the All In podcast. So here what they're saying is LA office towers are selling for less now than the amount of debt on them. And he says that it's true in San Francisco as well. So office towers, even if they have got like $100 million left of financing on them, are selling for less than that, right? So Elon Musk jumps in there and says commercial real estate is melting down fast. Home values next. So just to give you guys some bit of counter to what Elon said, right? Elon doesn't know everything about the economy. Commercial real estate, definitely a problem. What he says here about home values next, Cernovich comes in and says home prices may fall, but people were doing too much flipping into higher cost homes anyway, which was driven by real estate agents and propaganda. Unless there's massive job losses, which Cernovich says is possible, then even a midterm home price decrease won't have much impact, right? So I'd say Cernovich is pretty close here to the mark. But nevertheless, what have Bitcoiners been saying for a long time, that the whole housing situation in America is really because of the failure of the dollar to be a store of value anyway, right? What created a situation in America where almost everyone has their entire retirement plan, all of their savings locked up in their real estate in the home they live in? Well, a lot of Bitcoiners have been saying that this is fundamentally a problem of the US dollar not being an instrument that is easy to save because it has targeted and baked in inflation, and because monetary policy does nothing to incentivize saving money. It definitely incentivizes wealth creation by using financial engineers, Wall Street instruments, knowing the equities market, understanding how maturity transformation functions with bond buying. But what Bitcoiners and what this whole show is about is we don't want to have a 130 IQ and to know about all these things if we just want to be a chair maker and save our money, right? That's the main problem. And that's what Bitcoiners have been saying for a long time, that we've ceded too much territory to and too much influence to these institutions that continue to demand more performance, more credentialism in order to participate just to save money, more difficult scenarios where the people who can actually participate in modern life have to beat the bankers, have to beat the policymakers, have to be smarter than them, have to see around corners, which is fine, right? That is where you end up getting these situations where way more than half the population doesn't understand what the heck is going on and just assume that the people who are credentialed can understand these systems. They're going to fix them in no time. It should be fine, right? Print more money if you need money, right? Wherever that logic comes from a complete abdication on the part of most people to be able to navigate this confusopoly. I mean, look what it requires just to participate in modern life these days. And a lot of that has to do with the money not functioning correctly, and a lot of the way we save money being moved into home buying. Now, look at what that even does for education, right? Education becomes caught up in buying houses. If you don't buy a house in the right zip code in America, your kids aren't going to get the right education, and that's another layer of complexity added to saving money, right? Which makes it way too complicated to navigate life these days, which is why there is such an appetite to start over, to create a new system, to level the playing field in a way that doesn't force people to have an IQ of 130 just to have to try and save a little bit of money and participate in modern society. So the confusopoly that's around us, heavily influenced by this real estate market, really a result of the failure of the dollar to be a savings vehicle. And Thomas Massey here has we always discourage, when thinking about the U.S. economy, to put it into personable terms, or to scale it down to the individual, right? A nation's debt is not the same as personal debt, right? We all understand that. But still, the image can be effective, especially when it's so visual. So here's Thomas Massey giving his take on the U.S. economy, along the same lines of the debate around the debt ceiling and all of this consumption and all of this debt, and what's going on with real estate and what's going on with the dollar and things like that. So someone asked Thomas Massey to explain to him, like he's 8, what's going on with the debt ceiling and U.S. economy. This is what he says. We'll be taking out a second mortgage this week to pay off the credit cards, but it's not until September that we're actually buying the bass boat, the tanning bed, and a big screen TV. So mixing the consumption with the personal debt and those kinds of things, right? So you can see right away that without the U.S. economy, without America absolutely dominating the global economy, things like sanctions don't have the same bite they once had, right? Iran had a much worse scenario, much worse fallout than Russia did. But Russia has now shown the way, and other countries can start copying what's been going on, right? So, but it shows just how much things are changing. If you get the economy right, if America had gotten the economy right, if it had managed to debate things around the Trump-Russia collusion case better, and there was still more trust in the media, if the media had been able to discuss the risks of interest rate changes by the Federal Reserve more openly, and there was more trust in them, we probably wouldn't be in this situation today. It would probably be a very different scenario. You'd still have many people on America's side, let's say. Now, a lot of people want to see America succeed. I'm one of them, right? I don't want to see America getting poor. I don't want to see America losing. I don't want to see anyone in the world getting poor and losing and any of those things. But of course, I live in North America and have a preference for this place, especially to not feel those effects simply because I'm from here, right? That if I had to choose, that would just be what I chose. So the institutions changing to this pace, the way things are changing, and the appetite that people in America have for change is becoming so great that you're seeing conversations around this change everywhere, right? America getting its economy right, good, right? But when it gets it wrong, it creates all of this opportunity. And the appetite you see out there, even from people like this, right? You get Jordan Peterson. So Jordan Peterson is announcing a new event, right? He's in London working with ARC, people to organize a vision of an inaugural conference. So, I mean, we've already got the conference, Bitcoin, right? We're already covering all these issues. Jordan Peterson, who was a speaker at Bitcoin 2022, launching his own event to talk about all of these things. And I think it's important. We, as someone who helps program the anti-WEF event, the anti-Davos event, the anti-UN Congress, the anti-BRICS conference, right? That's what we do. The anti Jekyll Hyde meeting, right? That's the stuff that we create at our show, and now you get someone like Jordan Peterson who's doing the same, right? So this is what he says: we are developing a positive vision of the future for those with the eyes of serpents. Sign up for our newsletter at the bottom of this page, right? We are trying to determine how to further a vision of subsidiary organization as an alternative to tyranny and slavery. Responsibility for everyone, individual, couple, family, community, nation, and state. All the responsibility you abandon will be taken up by tyrants and used against you. We want everyone who is trying, however imperfectly, to aim up on board and are working to make that possible as fast as practical, right? So he's talking about making this new conference, new forum in which all these ideas can be discussed. He's not the only one, right? Even in America, the folks at the Atlantic Council. So you guys know what the Atlantic Council is, right? It's one of the top, most powerful institutions created in the wake of World War II to help manage the world, right? They're partly behind using the UN as this smokescreen that America has for a long time to hide its hegemonic points of view, right? But it's already setting in. Balaji here talking about it, right? We are seeing glimmerings of the reality of the world changing. As Glenn Greenwald noted, the US establishment has begun to admit that the rest of the world is really most of the world, right? And most of the world, including most Americans, are no longer aligned with the US establishment. And so here's a piece from the Atlantic Council called Shaping the New Democratic World Order. And their point here is that why are they even the rest of the world? They are the world, representing 6.5 billion people, right? So this is from their own literature. And their project focuses on the U.S. coordinating with its democratic allies to have the D10, right? A core group of leading democracies to develop joint strategies and align policy for addressing today's most significant global challenges. The Alliance of Democracies, the Democratic Technology Alliance to develop common norms and standards that are consistent with liberal values and ensure that the free world prevails in the race for advanced technologies, the Democratic Trade and Economic Partnership, rights, supply chains, cooperation amongst democracies, blah, 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 blah. But are people going to have any faith in this stuff when we already have this European case, right? One we were talking about yesterday, where now Europe has threatened, right? This is the democracies talking about technological coordination, right? Well, they tried to suppress all of this COVID stuff, for example, in America through the media. They tried in Europe and were very successful in multiple instances. Now, yesterday we were talking about Elon Musk withdrawing from a voluntary EU code of conduct when it comes to disinformation. France threatening to ban Twitter, a Texas company, right? Some people yesterday suggesting if they're threatening Texas in this way, Texas should just turn around and threaten Europe about energy security and see how that takes them, right? That'll push them right back into Putin's hands. Here's what we know. France's digital minister threatens to ban Twitter from the entire EU territory if Elon Musk does not close down free speech. Free speech absolutist Elon Musk then withdrew Twitter out of the EU's voluntary code of practice against disinformation. The EU is furious that Elon has reinstated some of Twitter's largest social media influencers which is having a huge impact on far left governments and institutions. Elon has till August 25th to enforce digital ID, traceability of users, permanent suspensions to be reinstated. EU decides what is disinformation on Ukraine/Russia, gender ideology, climate change, pharmaceutical products, government relations. So, who's going to win this fight? Is it going to be Jordan Peterson and the Bitcoiners and even the BRICS folks, in a sense, people who are trying to redesign these institutions? Or is it going to be the Council on American, or the Council on American, the Atlantic Council? Is it going to be any of these folks, right? Well, if you're going to bet on it at this point, right, you can't bet on the American folks. There's no momentum. If it was a game, if this was a sport, right, the American team is down bad. And we're going into the end of the cycle here, right? America has elections coming up. Now, again, I believe Americans are going to come through this much better than they were before, much better than they were before. But the institutions that America has used to perpetuate every bit of influence around the world that America has insisted on since World War II, those things are not going to make it. And that's what Bitcoiners are betting on, right? Bitcoiners are betting on individual Americans doing better than American institutions. That's what they'd want to see anyway. That's why Bitcoin is a P2P network, both in information and in how we would like to see it grow, right? We would like to see decentralized mining, for example. I can't imagine any Bitcoiner who doesn't want to see home mining take off, who doesn't want to see people running rigs in every home as being probably more important than everyone having a hot wallet where they can buy coffee, right? So American institutions are the big losers after Russia collusion, right? They were designed to protect the abuse of the media in order to protect American institutions from Russian influence in degrading their credibility, ended up creating the lack of credibility in American institutions themselves. And now you have all of this appetite. You've got BRICS, you've got Jordan Peterson, you've got the reason why our show is so successful, right? Literally, the reason why our show is so successful is because you have this many people with an appetite to completely change the world. And you probably wouldn't have had that 5 or 6 years ago had they not lied so much, right? So that's how we're doing it, right? Let's see what we got in comments here, right? Hey, Sats and Rand. Don't heads of state basically have diplomatic immunity anyway? That is a good question. Not exactly. I think if the International Criminal Court does ask or press charges, I'm not sure how the court works exactly, but I think that takes it. I think that alters it. So what does Philippe Porto say? The U.S. doesn't abide the ICC. Yeah, they don't. It's mostly a Eurocentric court. I think they were originally supposed to. They set it up for themselves, but didn't really bother, as they do with most things. So let me ask you this. If Soros didn't go to prison for attacking the Bank of England, how come Bitcoiners are going to go to concentration camps when the USD collapses? Well, I don't know if we're going to go to concentration camps. I mean, I worry about it, but I don't know if that's going to happen. It's basic biology. And attacking the Bank of England the way he did, right? I go back and see. I've done the math because I want to do it to Canada, and it didn't cost that much money. It was just a good bet. It was just a smart bet that he made. 10 billion shorts. He knew how much England had. It was almost 50 billion USD in reserves. His $10 billion short attracted a bit more attention, and they busted it. They cost all 50 billion and 500 basis points in a day. I know because Canada has the exact same amount of money England had in 91. So when the whole truckers thing happened, I said, enough's enough. Let's just run the math here and let's knock them out and see what happens, right? How much Bitcoin is it going to cost us? So there you go. Beardy day without the government. How will I know what to do, sir? Yeah. Do I brush my teeth now? You won't need to know what to do. Without government, there wouldn't be a world to begin with. Government creates reality. A little bit, yeah, a little bit. The money is lost. Don't follow. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Internet and Bitcoin, the great levelers. Did I say Jekyll Hyde instead of Jekyll Island? Jekyll Hyde Island. No, I didn't do that. Fiat is the concentration camp. Yeah, exactly. Bitcoin Graffiti, I did not do it today, but I will do it tomorrow. Thanks for reminding me. Thanks for reminding me. Truth or dare to be truthful. Yeah, indeed. Johnny Rico, sun, or heart, sun, heart, peace. Indeed. We like it. All right, team. That's all I got for you today. I was going to talk a bit more about the drone attack in Moscow with the Doritos falling, you know, the Dorito drones, right? So the Dorito drones have been coming around, right? What are your thoughts on Luke Broyles' film, The Case for Bitcoin? Have you heard? No, I haven't, Von Ray. I'll look into that, though. Sounds interesting. Mm-hmm. Markets gapping up. Yeah, no ceiling anymore. Fun days. So yeah, the attack drones are, remember my prediction, right? Lots of drones. Moscow would be hit. We're there. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the China launched a few astronauts, 3, including a civilian, into orbit. You know, as much as I say the economy and energy are everything, the space thing is important too. You can't abdicate space, right? That's not a good idea. Still dark here. Cool. All right, team. Have a great day, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for joining. I'll see you tomorrow.